Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Wonder of It All, a podcast about the blessings and curses of success. My name is Sean Nelson. I'm your host. My guest this episode is Lena Hall, actress and musician, best known for having won a Tony Award in 2014 for Best Featured Actress in a Musical for playing Yitzhak, the long-suffering foil bandmate companion of Hedwig in the Broadway production of John Cameron Mitchell's immortal Hedwig and the Angry Inch, starring Neil Patrick Harris. Despite her tender age, Lena is a veteran trouper who has performed in every imaginable form of media. Broadway, off-Broadway, touring companies, musicals from Cats to The Toxic Avenger, and many more besides. Straight plays, feature films, TV series, reality TV, animation. She has really done everything. We get into many of the areas that surround having a career like hers, and we pay special attention to a question that has fascinated me for my entire adult life, which is the essential difference, as I see it, between singing for the stage and singing rock and roll. So I don't really see any delicate way into this subject, so I'm just going to ask directly for you to tell the story of how you wound up singing for the Pope when you were 7 years old.
Oh, sure.
It doesn't come up naturally.
No, it doesn't. And it's a very rare thing. Not many people have done that. And I have photographic evidence. Thank you very much. I feel like there's a video out there somewhere.
It would be a weird brag if it weren't true. Who would make that up?
Apparently there's my mom, she kept this note from a teacher of mine, and the note said, my real name is Selena, but the note said, Selena is a wonderful student, but I am concerned because she does tend to tell, exaggerated stories about things. And maybe it's just a phase and you need to, my mom kept that note. I was like, that's a weird note to keep, Mom. But no, the Pope thing did happen. And I was 7 years old, and I grew up in a family of, dance. My dad had his own ballet company called Dance Spectrum, and my mother was his prima ballerina. The arts was just always around us. And at the time, when I was 7, my sister was in girls' choir, so she was singing. And she's 5 years older than me. And the Pope was coming to San Francisco, and my sister was rehearsing in the girls' choir to sing for the Pope for his arrival. And then my dad was asked to choreograph a ballet for the Pope for his arrival. So my whole family was involved, and I was the only one who wasn't really doing anything, but I was always at all the rehearsals. And then it was I think the big rehearsal kind of before the event, and there was a trio of kids singing a song together. And I guess I was singing along, and I really don't remember that, but I guess I was singing along. And then last minute, one of the kids had to drop out, and someone who was watching the rehearsal had heard me sing and had suggested that I take their place. So it wasn't really like I had no rehearsal, and somehow I knew and picked up the song really fast. And it was probably just from sitting around at all the rehearsals and listening to it a bunch of times.
Right.
So we woke up at 3 a.m. I do remember the early morning getting in the car with my parents and my sister and driving to Candlestick Stadium, which no longer exists, right, to do a sound check and a stage through, and to kind of go through the whole process before we did the show. My parents always call it the Pope Show.
The Pope Show. Or as I call it, the Catholic Church.
Yes. And I remember that very clearly. I remember what I was wearing, and I saw the picture, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's definitely what I was wearing, because I remember that. But it was a tiered dress with a pink rose on it. Very cute, very girly. And I remember there was a kerfuffle, because the Pope, it was supposed to take the Pope a long time to get from wherever he started, and he was going to take a tour through the city and then eventually get to Candlestick Stadium, right, which was packed with people. But because nobody was waiting to wave at the Pope, fewer people were waiting than normal in other cities. I mean, this is San Francisco.
San Francisco in the late 80s.
In 87.
Right.
So he got there really fast, and then suddenly this whole program that they had planned, like, suddenly had to get cut short. So like my dad's ballet got cut short, and all these things got cut short. But I got up and I sang the trio with the kids. And honestly, I don't remember if the Pope was even there yet. But we got up to sing, and I do remember that we all collectively, the three of us, forgot the lyrics at the exact same time. We all went up at the same time,
Right.
and then we all came back in. And that was like my very first performance, I think. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it was like for 70,000 people. I think Candlestick Stadium held like 40,000 or something in the seats. And then the whole, field was covered with people.
Right.
So it was a lot of people. Maybe I would say like 50 to 70,000. I don't know, something huge. And that was the biggest audience I've ever performed for.
It's a pretty big audience.
Yeah.
And you weren't nervous because you were just a little sort of, you were ham, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much a ham. Love attention. Always the center of attention. I'm the little sister.
Right.
And so for me, it was just kind of like, I did that. And there was nothing out of the ordinary about that for me, other than like the early morning and the amount of people.
Right.
But everything else was pretty, I'd experienced that being on stage.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, everything since then has been downhill. But
Correct.
in other ways, it was just the beginning. Was it an original composition, or was it sacred music? Was it?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I'm sure it was sacred music. It must have been.
Right.
But I actually don't remember. But if someone can find the video, it's from 1987 at Candlestick Stadium when the Pope John Paul II came and visited. There's got to be video. I mean, it's got to be.
There must be. There's footage of the Beatles playing their last show ever at Candlestick Park, speaking of John and Paul.
Did they play their last show at Candlestick Stadium?
Their very last show.
Really?
Yeah. So you were just like the Ronettes opening for the Beatles. But that wasn't the Pope's last appearance. No. Growing up in that environment where everybody was always doing some sort of art and performance and stuff like that, was there, San Francisco, that sort of milieu, I'm kind of imagining it was a little bit slightly loftier ideas about art, not just like doing a show for no reason. Did that influence your kind of aesthetic as you were getting older and sort of aspiring to a career in the arts, or a life in the arts, I should say?
I think it didn't. I think because everything my parents did was so weird, and I would say abnormal, of course, but what is normal now? I can look back at it and be like, my parents were so cool.
Right.
Like, oh my God. But like at the time growing up, I just wanted to be normal. Like I wanted normal parents who had a normal house and who were normal people with
Right.
normal jobs. Like, my desire for minimalism was very high because I grew up in a house that was just filled with like 1960s, 70s acid art everywhere.
Yeah.
There was so much stuff in the house always. There were costumes in the basement, which was great. I mean, it's interesting because I would play with the costumes all the time, and these were all costumes from my dad's ballets that were, what kid has an entire costume, shop to their disposal? When I would go trick-or-treating during Halloween, I would change costumes multiple times and just trick-or-treat around the same block over and over again, because it was like I didn't have to choose.
Shrewd. Yeah.
But like, because the house I grew up in was so eccentric and my parents were so eccentric. I mean, they're very much bohemian, like hippies,
Right.
If you can imagine.
It's very easy to imagine.
Yeah. And so my desire was that I would be like an accountant or do something normal and have a normal job. And I think that like musical theater to me probably felt a lot more structured than like the ballet world or dance or even like orchestra or something like that. I don't know. It was like musical theater. I liked musical theater. But then, I also really wanted to be in TV and film because it felt like a little more normal, maybe. Yeah, it just wasn't.
Well, I mean, it's show
eccentric.
business, essentially. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know your parents, but like when I think about someone who was a committed, sort of dance maker in San Francisco from the 60s to, onward, I tend to think of a certain kind of, I don't mean it pejoratively, but like a snob about certain forms of art. And like show business maybe not being, because if you wanted to be in show business, you wouldn't have moved to San Francisco to pursue art. So to pursue dance, I should say. So I'm just wondering if that, if your sort of taste and your sort of growing ambition as you were getting older, how they sort of felt about it. Was it, the classic situation is that they support their kid because they love you and they want to see you do well, but they maybe look down their nose slightly at that sort of that form?
My dad is a very, he's a very fascinating man. He's always been extremely proud of me. And so when I left to do my first show right out of high school, I went on tour with Cats. He was so thrilled. And I went to Broadway and he was thrilled. My dad was much more open with telling me how happy he was and how proud he was of me for the path that I took. My mother, however, was much different. I mean, she grew up as a prima ballerina and everything about the ballet world is perfection and picking and so she would come to see my shows, and the first thing out of her mouth was usually a correction or, that she wished I had was the ingenue or, the pretty girl, the sweet girl. And of course, I was always cast as like, the hell beast.
Right.
I think her desire for me to be this beautiful swan, it was like, that's what she wanted. But things have changed, she's definitely kind of come around and has changed her perspective a lot on what I do. But at first, it was really hard for her to let go of me not being the prima ballerina.
In her mold.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. You always love that when you come off stage and your parents are like, oh, that's too bad. It's unfortunate.
It's okay. I can laugh about it now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, always.
Well, I mean, given that you started young and have been working on this career for a long time now, or at least a long, part of your life, when you're a child and you have these it is about attention, essentially, and that kind of, for some performers, that never really changes, even if it can be dressed up in other sort of, language.
Yeah.
But, what about your ambition has changed as you've gone on and had, lots of successes? But, what do you still like about it? What's different about what you like about it than when you started?
I think we start sometimes, well, at least I started with different intentions. My intention for my biggest desire was TV film. Like I wanted to be in TV and film so bad, but it wasn't because I wanted to be an actor. It was because I wanted to marry Jonathan Brandis. The only way I knew I was going to get to him and meet him was if I was famous.
Yeah.
And the only way I could be famous is if TV film, right, at that time. And so it was like, that was like my main goal. I mean, I had the gall to write an entire letter to Gersh Agency and send it with my headshot resume and be like, I am the next big thing. Everything was misspelled though, and it was just
it doesn't seem impossible that they might not have even known that at that agency.
True. And I spelled Gersh wrong.
They would have noticed that. Yeah.
But that for the TV film thing, it was like the intention was like to bury someone, which is really very bizarre. It wasn't like about it wasn't about the project, it was like the fame, right? And then I accidentally got into, I don't think I ever thought it was a possibility to get into Broadway. Like that was accidental. That was right place, right time, right amount of confidence, and then luck, a little bit of luck. So it was like preparation, this confidence that we never get again when we're that young, because when you're 17 years old, you think you're the greatest thing in the world, right?
Right.
And you know everything. And then, and it's like a naive confidence.
Well, you're sort of building the self that you want others to perceive. You know, like you have that kind of projection of yourself.
Yeah. And that's like how it started with this naive confidence. And I didn't really know where I wanted my career to go. Because I got on Broadway so young. I was 18 19, because at 18 I did the tour, 19 I went to Broadway. And it was like, oh, well, that's easy. Now what, right? Now what? And so the goal was always to like star in a musical, but I didn't know really why. Like it was just to star in a musical. It was so nebulous. Mm-hmm. There was no like intention, I guess. And then as time went on, the lessons that I learned through different shows and different heartbreak taught me how to be intentional and understand what exactly it is I want to represent in the industry, and what kind of projects I actually want to do, and that I actually can choose and have this trajectory in mind that I want to accomplish.
Well, that's such a huge sort of level to reach, even just understanding the idea of choosing as like that it might be possible. Because I think a lot of actors, they just want to do anything. And in a way, the thing of like you wanted to star in a Broadway musical because why not? Because, you're trying, like, someone has to star in it.
Right,
why shouldn't you? If you're trying to get in it, why not? But what was that? How did that happen when you went from, you did the touring show of Cats, you wound up getting in, it wasn't the Broadway production of Cats, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, you went from the touring company to, was that,
they moved, yeah.
Was that something that they sort of did? Was it sort of like touring as a farm team and then you would get in the show?
Not always.
In that organization?
It was interesting because I came in so young, and of course that naive confidence that I had, and a lot of the other performers did not like me. And because I started off as a swing, and what a swing does is a swing is off stage every night, and they understudy different roles. And so when I started, I understudied 4 different roles, and after only 2 months, they put me in a role. They moved me over to be Demeter on stage, which was like just an onstage role. And the women who had been in the company for longer were like, what?
Right.
Like, she's only 17. Like, what's the deal? She's only 18, because I had just turned 18. And I didn't even ask for it. Like, it wasn't even like I asked for it or auditioned for it. I just was doing my job, and it happened. Mm-hmm. And so there was a bit of animosity there. And then...
Well, they were cats, after all.
And then, like, a year later, I got a phone call, and they were like, hey, we want to bring you to Broadway. And I didn't know that was even a possibility.
Right.
Like, not a lot of people from the tour were moved to Broadway. And again, for me, I think at the time it was like timing, luck, right place, right time, what they needed, and the ability to just be like, yes.
Was it playing the same role?
Yeah.
Demeter? Mm-hmm. I mean, Cats was it was like a little industry of its own. It was such a crazy success. It ran for so long.
Yeah.
That in a way, it's sort of, I mean, I'm speaking from ignorance here, but I'm also just assuming that, like, being, obviously, anyone who gets any work on really any stage anywhere, but especially on a Broadway stage, that's a massive accomplishment. And also, it doesn't necessarily translate to more work, but it did for you, right? Mm-hmm. To a degree?
Yeah. It's really hard to get your first show, and it's harder to get your second.
Right.
But then after your second, you're in the fam. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that, like, again, like, I came in and was kind of this willow, just going with the flow. Mm-hmm. I had no intention. An agent saw me, and they were like, oh, you should come and sign with us. And I was like, all right. I didn't even know I needed an agent. Like, you know, like I wasn't even looking for one, but okay. Like
Right.
it was like this going with the flow. And so then for that year that I was on Broadway and Cats, I was auditioning like crazy. And I would go to these auditions, and even if I intentionally knew and wanted to be in the show, I'd fail like constantly. In fact, it was really hard. It was frustrating because I wasn't as good as everyone. Like the talent level in New York is insane. And when you're 18 or 19, you're green, and it's hard to explain what that green is, but it's just you can just feel it, you can tell, and so I was going in for like leading young roles, like Zanita in the Music Man, right? And I would go in and I would be up against these women who were just on a whole other level, and I wasn't even there yet, and I hadn't even I hadn't even dusted and like myself off from moving to New York yet, and it was very, very obvious. But I had a job, and that was like something that everybody else didn't have, is that I was just going to a job every night. The next thing I did though was the national tour of Annie Get Your Gun, and it was like they had announced the closing of Cats, and I got really, really scared, and so I jumped on this tour to do, and it was kind of, I look back at it and I'm like, why didn't I stay to the end to celebrate the end of Cats? Like, why didn't I do that? But I got scared, and I didn't know what was next on the docket for me, and I needed another job, and I've always been super independent, and I never ever asked my parents for help, so I knew I had to just go out there and do something, and I did that.
I mean, that seems like it is as much about like the thing you were talking about with the greenness, but then again, I don't really know many working actors who wouldn't, knowing that a job is ending, wouldn't jump on another job, because it's a job, at the very least, and presumably not such a bad gig. I've never been in a touring company of any kind. I always wonder, I guess I should just ask directly, was it a good job? I mean, what's good about a touring company versus doing a regular, sort of a production?
The great thing about touring is that you get your production salary, and then on top of that, you get a per diem. And so that per diem is going to pay for your hotels and all your food and all that kind of stuff. But if you're kind of crafty with it, you double up with someone, you save that money, and then you also don't really have rent, and so you're able to actually save a good nest egg. I always tell young people, I'm like, who are starting out in the industry, I'm like, if you can book tours, book them now. If you can do tours, like if you book a tour, do it now while you're young. You want to tour when in your 20s.
Right.
You really want to tour in your 20s because it's a chance for you to save up a nest egg to sit back on, to come into the city and then do the hard work, which is saying no, the auditions. If you really want to be on Broadway, you have to be in New York, and you have to do the hard thing of saying no to shows that will take you away from New York.
Right.
Yeah.
At what point during all of this and what followed did you, this is a hard question I find for actors to answer. When did you feel like you were successful? Or do you even yet feel like you're successful? That's yet another question.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, you went from starting to a kind of success that's undeniable, but also, there's always a level above you or 20 levels above you. But, like at the same time, it's undeniable when you're doing a Broadway show that you are actually doing a Broadway show.
Right.
And there's but I don't know, like, I guess sometimes the question is, when did you feel validated first when you were doing all this stuff? Again, never.
I mean, when I won a Tony Award, that was when I felt the most validation for all the work that I had done for like 15 years.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
I would argue.
But then there's this stigma that comes with the Tony
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
And I mean, look, there's a lot of arguments for and against awards. I personally find that awards or medals or competition help to push an industry forward. And if there's nothing that you can gain, like an award or 5 stars, or like if there's not a prize, then what are you pushing the industry for there's this weird, it's like we get it in our apps, right? When like if you have like a weight loss app, it's like it will like reward you for eating, it's like these weird, because our
do
brains,
your steps.
Our brains, they do push harder if there is some kind of a reward at the end of the day. Other people find it to be awful, whatever.
But in the world in which awards exist, and you can be nominated for them and indeed win them, wouldn't you really rather be nominated for them and win them?
Yeah. The interesting thing for me is I think that the win came with this caveat that I was now a star. And, the people who were my manager and my agent at the time, they did treat me as such and say, don't, we're not going to send you in for guess this, guess that. You're not, you need to be the lead. And I'm like, okay. And I listened to that, and I didn't listen to what I needed. And instead, I listened to this, like, you won an award, you're a star now.
Right.
And unfortunately, that mindset will come with a massive amount of disappointment. There's a lot of assumptions that come with an award win. A lot of people assume that you've just made a ton of money, which
Right.
A lot of people assume that you're like busy and they can't even contact you.
Right.
And when it's not true. It's like I'm just struggling, but now I've been put on another level, and now I'm competing with undeniable people. Again, it's like when I came to New York and I was super green and I was like competing for a role against these like seasoned people who'd been there for years. That same thing happened. It was like I won a Tony Award, but then I was now auditioning on the same level as like Scarlett Johansson or, Michelle Williams or both of them. And, it was like, I was like, how do I don't even compare. Like, people don't know my name. They don't, like, I'm not a household and recognizable thing. I won for playing a man, and I'm completely unrecognizable in the character.
Right.
And so, that really wore on me a lot. And I just think that if I had listened to like my gut and what I needed, I would have been doing just what I wanted, and I wouldn't have listened to you're a star, you're too good for that.
Right. Well, people who are agents and managers and publicists, I guess, to one extent or another, often it feels like they live for things like that, because then they can, first of all, justify their salary or their rate. But like, because their client then is differentiated in some way that they can absolutely say. But it's been my experience, not so much personally, though a little bit, but mostly watching friends of mine who have been in roughly similar positions, that when their people start telling them, no, don't do that, you're special, wait for this or that thing to come your way, it tends to alienate the very people that they want most to work with. That tends to prevent them from being able to do the things they want most to do. And did you find that actually happened specifically? Were there things that you missed out on because of that? Yeah,
for sure. There were so many things going on and projects that I loved. I mean, I had like a rock band and the, not just the people who were working for me, but also people around me. They were just like, they poo-pooed on things that I loved and were like, you're better than this. And so like I drank that Kool-Aid, but it took away the things that I really wanted to do and loved to do. Like there were projects that I was on, like for Broadway shows that I was on, and I really wanted to do them. And it didn't matter if they were like, not the greatest thing in the world. For me, playing the role was what I really wanted. Yeah. And it got pushed to the sideline because it was like, you're a star, you're going to star on TV, and that is it. TV film is what we want, and that is it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, but I came from Broadway. Why would I just turn my back? And so for, a good 5 years, I didn't do anything on Broadway. And I mean, I haven't returned to Broadway since Hedwig, and I'm sad about that because I love it so much. There's nothing like performing in front of a live audience, 8 shows a week, and telling the same story, and like having that story become ever layered every show, every time you do it. There's so much to discover. Whereas with like TV film, while it's a great industry and it's fun to do, you only get a couple of takes to add the layers.
Yeah.
And you don't get a year's worth of 8 shows a week to just completely layer on all the crap. Like, and I miss that. And it was almost like it was either that or that, and I couldn't have both, and I wanted both. you know? And I didn't need
I hear you.
Yeah. So, now I'm still working on the balancing act and still trying my hardest to come back to the business that I started in and the industry that I so love.
Right. Do the laurels a Tony Award is a Tony Award. There's no denying that. But all the sort of stage stuff that you've done, does it have value to like film and TV casting directors in any kind of appreciable way, or is it just like another sort of line on a resume?
It used to not mean anything. Mm-hmm. In fact, it used to be a deterrent. The musical theater. Mm-hmm. I think the Tony Award helped me to be less of a deterrent. Mm-hmm. But I was so green in TV and film, so I'm sure that people were like, oh, she's too theatrical.
Right.
When I was auditioning, because I just didn't have my bearings enough. I needed to do a bunch of like guest stars and little things in order to like understand this other, understand the camera,
right,
and not a stage. It doesn't mean that, a stage actor can't do TV film. It's just it's like a totally just different thing.
Right.
And so being thrown in, and I see all my old self-tapes from right after I won a Tony Award where I'm auditioning for the leads in all these movies and TV shows, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't have cast myself either.
Yeah.
Like, I really needed to learn somewhere, and I wasn't getting that. It was just like, oh, you're a star, so yeah. And I'm like, well, maybe not in that venue.
Right.
Maybe, if I had my way, if I could go back and redo, I would have done back-to-back Broadway shows and led these shows, saw what that did. I'm sure I would have gotten some more nominations, but that would have kept my name in the public eye for a lot more. And I would have been doing small guest stars, tiny roles on TV shows, little things, cameos in film, if I could get them. Then I would go out for bigger stuff, because then it's like I've built up this kind of resume for that, and not just thrown in with the sharks.
I'm reminded of the Spalding Gray had a great bit in his monologue, Monster in a Box, where he's offered the lead role in Our Town as a stage manager, and his film agent just like, oh my God, what are you talking about? No, you didn't work this hard to be an actor all these years only to be a stage manager.
It's almost like it's sad, because it's like musical theater is the hardest of the art forms. Well, actually, ballet is the hardest of the art forms, but musical theater is one of the hardest of the art forms, and it's kind of looked down upon a little bit by TV film people, mm-hmm. and it's like no, I don't think that's not quite fair mm-hmm. to snub your nose, because theater there's something different. It's just different, and it's not, it's like give us a shot, for Christ.
I mean, it's interesting, that subject, because it's also, I think, musical theater is just a polarizing thing. I mean, obviously, we're in New York right now. New York is where the stage still exists technically and all of that. That's really good. But, like 50, 60, 70 years ago, musical theater was the dominant form, certainly, of popular music and entertainment. And, film had made a lot of good inroads, and television wasn't quite happening yet. But, like, over the years, it has come to kind of, there are people who love it, obviously, but then the feeling that there is a blanket rejection of the entire idiom is very easy to find out in the world. I personally am a bit of a fence sitter because I grew up really loving it and doing it, and then at a certain point, it started to rub me the wrong way. And there are things about it, but I feel lots of different ways about it.
Yeah.
But have you encountered that particular, not just with, casting directors or professionally, but like in the world when you talk to people you meet or whatever, and have you met people who just object to musical theater no matter what?
Yeah, for sure. It's like people who object to country music, right?
Right.
Yeah, but not all musical theater is the same, and not all country music is the same.
Of course.
And there is, even I don't listen to musical theater unless it's a specific show that's like, typical musical theater. Like, I'm not going to throw on the Wicked soundtrack. I'm not going to throw on Hamilton. I'm not going to throw on Rent. I'm not going to throw on, Oklahoma. Like, I'm just not. It's just not what I gravitate to listen to. I like sad, dark music from the 90s. Like, right. That's how I grew up.
Well, you've come to the right podcast.
But if there is a show that has that kind of music in it, then I will listen to it, like Hedwig.
Sure. Hedwig is such an outlier in so many ways because it really is. It's indescribably great, obviously, but it has the best song. The songs are really good. But I find that when I've talked to people about that show and the film, obviously, the thing that people like to say is that, yeah, it's really good. The songs would be good not in a show. They would be good even as real songs or whatever. That idea. And they're not less real for being in this show.
No.
But also rock and roll, the marriage of rock and roll and theater, which we've discussed ever so briefly, is tricky.
Yep.
Frequently, I think, misbegotten. But there are, occasional examples of it working all right. But to me, so you're a singer. You were in a rock and roll band, or are you still? Is that band still happening?
No.
Okay. But you have made solo records, and you have performed a lot as just a singer, and you sing, these kind of dark rock songs. That's a lot of your repertoire. But I wonder, since you are a pro, if you recognize or credit the idea that there is a fundamental difference between singing for the legitimate stage and singing in a rock band.
No, none. The only difference is singing on stage, you're in the midst of telling a story, whereas singing in a rock band, you're telling a story at a time. Right. So, it's interesting because the idea of rock and roll and musical theater is very rarely done right and well. Oftentimes it is cheesy or totally overly dramatic. And it's just, it's too bad because because rock and roll is such a, there's so many different sounds in rock and roll, and
right.
there's so many different storytellers in rock and roll, and writers, who are incredible songwriters, and they're in the rock field, but would make amazing musicals like Muse. Muse is a rock band that I love, and I love Muse because they have kind of an operatic vibe.
For sure.
And it's like that, it's too bad because Matt Bellamy would write one hell of a musical, and you would probably call it a I would think he would write like an operetta. Kind of like Jesus Christ Superstar is sung through, and Evita is sung through, like a rockera. A rockera.
Opera rock.
Yeah. But that's, but the problem is that musical theater is not embracing these rock writers who want to tell story and come into the space because it's too loud. And like I did a show back in, I think it was 2011 or something like that, up at ART, and it was a Greek myth. And the music was done by Serge Tankian from System of a Down. And the show was unbelievable, like nothing you had ever seen. And the entire cast was like, it left such an indelible mark on us because the music was so incredible and the storytelling was amazing. And it was a simple Greek myth that was turned into this, no intermission, immersive piece, and it was real rock and roll. I mean, real rock and roll was in there. I mean, they were all different types. They're beautiful songs, soft songs, hard rock songs, crazy songs. Like it went the gamut. It was amazing what Serge had written, and it never went anywhere because they thought it was too loud and it was like too ahead of its time. And that's the problem, is because producers are, certain people are very scared to shuck whatever trend is happening right now, what they think is going to sell tickets.
Right.
But you have to understand that if it's good and if it knows its audience, if it knows what audience and knows its audience, it's going to last. It's going to have a life.
I mean, a lot of rock songwriters are trying to find their way into writing for the stage because there's no more money anywhere else.
Right.
And that's a questionable motive, but I understand where it's coming from.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But my objection fundamentally is that I just feel like the band or the orchestra in a stage setting, it just can't be made loud enough to really do the stuff that rock and roll needs. It needs a certain level of volume. I don't know exactly what that is, but I do know when it's too quiet,
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I don't like going to see a Broadway show and they have like this full orchestra and you can't hear it. I'm like, the music should be the music should move me. Like that's the whole point of seeing musical theater, is because the music takes the emotion and it moves the audience.
Yeah.
And you need to hear the music and you need to hear everyone. And so there are actual shows now that are doing sound design incredibly, and it's the same sound designer. Mm-hmm. And I did notice it's MJ the Musical. And the sound design on MJ the Musical is unbelievable. Like everything, you can hear it crystal clear. You can hear the lyrics crystal clear, but you feel like you were at a Michael Jackson concert. You feel the bass. You feel that rumbling. I mean, it's huge. The sound is huge, and it really moved me. And I think that's what makes that show so desirable for people to go to, is because when they hear that sound, it's like they have to go back. Right. They have to see it again. And the same thing I saw with Anne Juliet. And Juliet is this funny, wacky, these are both jukebox musicals. Mm-hmm. But the sound design of Anne Juliet is such a surprise, because when you're listening to these songs, you feel like you're at a Backstreet Boys concert, or like at a Britney Spears concert, but you can hear every single line of dialogue. And this sound designer, and I'm blanking on his name, but he's brilliant. He's from the UK. He's from the rock world, so he really understands it. And it's the best that I've ever heard in a Broadway show. So I do believe that Broadway shows can handle rock and roll. It does depend on who the sound designer is. We had a great sound designer on Hedwig, but the thing about Hedwig was the band was on stage, right, and we all had handheld mics. There were no head mics. Yeah. We had proper handheld mics, which pick up sound in a different way. Of course. All of this to say, this is why I like awards, because if you have a sound design award, then people start to innovate. Right. And try and innovate new ways to to design sound, because sound is so important for a musical.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, when they were, is it And Juliet?
And Juliet.
I mean, it's innovative just to know that the people are actually singing those songs on stage. That'll be the first time that ever happened.
It's really good.
Instead of pre-recorded.
It's probably one of my favorite, jukebox musicals. The way that the music is used is probably one of the best that I've seen, where you're like, that works so well for that moment. You're like, how did they think of that? It's like, it doesn't feel, like, oh, they just named this character Sherry.
Right.
Played the song. Not that I had anything wrong with that show, but that show had a cheese factor to it that I think that MJ and Juliet do not. And Juliet has this very, very carefree, light quality about it, it's like, it's definitely written for me, like for my generation. Because when I go in there, I'm like, oh my God,
right.
all these songs, you know what I mean? And it's like loud, and you're like, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And you were in, I don't know if it was a full production or if it was a workshop or whatever, but didn't you do something that was based on Bat Out of Hell?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that seems like, that's a good marriage of rock and roll and theater. I mean, but it always was.
Yes.
I mean, good is another question, but I'm fine with it. I like it. I like Bat Out of Hell.
That show was insane. It was insane. I appreciated the bombacity, the bombastic approach to the, but that made sense for the music, because Jim Steinman's music is...
You don't underplay Jim Steinman.
Bombastic, but the sound. They got the sound right. We did it at City Center, and City Center has an incredible sound system, and the sound for our show, for Bat Out of Hell, was just top notch. And I did that, it was like 2 months of performances. It was so much fun, and the show was just... So, people either loved it or they were like, that was terrible.
Yeah. Which is exactly how it has always been with that record anyway. And so it's sort of, that's in keeping.
It was an exploding motorcycle. It was friggin' awesome.
It's like a Bat Out of Hell. I think the other thing that is divisive when it comes to stage musicals and rock and roll in particular, but really stage musicals maybe all told, is that there is a certain... It's not like there's only one way that people perform when they're performing, but there is a certain kind of gestural corniness or bigness, or, it's just called acting, I think, when you're doing a show like that. But in other ways, it's sort of, it's something that I don't even know if there are any rock and roll purists left, because it's such a sort of, it is itself a boutique art form now.
Yeah.
But, the dominant trend in popular music over the last 20 years has been very, big hand moves and lots of melisma and too many notes and this sort of performed sanctity kind of thing that actually I think owes it a lot more to theater than it does to any other art form. But only in the sense that it's not the good kind of theater, because it's very false to me. But people don't seem to mind. But it does seem like that kind of thing, not like rock and roll isn't gestural, not like there isn't a lot of... there's performance beyond just the performance of the music involved. I think it isn't acting. It's not the same as acting, though it is maybe related. Does that make any sense? Do you know what I'm actually saying?
I think you're saying that musical theater performers perform rock and roll in a certain way that makes it less authentic.
I guess. Authentic is a tricky word in lots of ways, too, because everything is so artificial. But, there was a story that I heard second, third, 12th hand about the celebrated musical theater performer and actor Michael Cerveris. Is that the name? He joined Bob Mould's band as a guitar player. Bob Mould from Husker Du and Sugar, one of my favorite artists who ever lived. And he was asked to leave the tour. It didn't work out for one reason or another after they'd done a few shows because he was just so crazily big on stage, doing flourishes with his guitar and kind of taking stage in a way that when it's your moment in a musical, say, you do because that's the gig,
Yeah.
But when it was in the context of being the other guitar player in a guitar rock band, I don't think it's because it drew focus. I think it's because it was just the wrong flavor of mustard to put on the thing. You know what I mean? And that is sort of what I'm talking about with regard to what I guess we call theatrical performance in singing.
I can't speak on Michael Cerverus because I didn't see him.
I didn't
in
either,
band.
but I read about it and I knew exactly what it was like. Not fair. And he's great. He's a major talent. I would never deny it.
I think that there's this idea that musical theater is a genre of music.
Right.
And it is not. Musical theater is a format of which a play and music come together and are performed on a stage. And that music can be anything and should be what's popular. It used to be what was popular. Now it's about 20 years behind.
Right.
It's about 20 years behind. But that's because it takes a really long time for shows to get done.
Sure.
The problem now that I've definitely found is that there's this younger generation of performers who've grown up listening to computerized stuff. So music that's come out, ever since 20 years? For the last 20 years is hyper computerized. Everything is so overly perfect.
Right.
And you hear that in also cast recordings because they do use Melodyne and Autotune on them. And cast recordings are usually done on the cheap. So they're done super fast and it's not like, they're not produced for months and months and months to make this amazing, delicious recording. I mean, it's like, you're in the studio one day and it's
Clock's ticking.
done.
Right.
Yeah, because it's never seen as, it's seen as like a T-shirt that you buy. It's
Right.
not seen as an art form, which I think might be one problem. Am I ever going to work again after this podcast? Who knows? If there was. Okay, so I do have a big problem with the Melodyne and Autotune trend that started happening a while ago. A lot of people put Melodyne and Autotune on people who don't even need it,
Right.
but it ends up computerizing their voice.
Yeah.
And that computerized sound is something that is influencing a whole new generation of people coming into the business, and they all listened to, Kristen Chenoweth or Sutton Foster or Dina Menzel. And those recordings are, and any new recordings as well. It's like this auto-tune. It's like this over-perfection of the sound. Glee is a great example. Glee is an amazing example. Every time I heard a recording from Glee, and this is no offense to the producers of Glee or anything like that, I couldn't listen to it because I could hear the computerization or I could hear the edits.
Yeah.
It didn't sound like a performance. It sounded like something cut up and edited, one syllable at a time almost sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't sound like a real voice.
There's no breath in it.
But then you have a whole generation that grew up thinking that was how you sang.
Yeah.
They didn't understand that, that's actually, perfected. Like with computers, it is nearly impossible to get that perfection. And there's a soullessness to when something is cut up that much and overproduced like that, or just produced with a lot of Melodyne and Autotune. And I hear that sound coming out of people now. And I hear these specific vowels and specific sound coming out of these musical theater kids, and they think that is what musical theater sounds like.
Right.
And they don't understand that it can be any genre, and it's got to come from, it's acting first, singing second. Is always acting first, singing second. And these kids are so and you know, whatever, this generation is so focused on sounding perfect because there's this weird perfection that is hoisted upon us because these albums come out and everybody sounds perfect.
Right.
And it's not natural. And so everyone is so worried about the notes being perfect and being perfect all the time. And they're also taught that they have to, you know, be perfect.
Right. But they also know that it can always be fixed in a funny way. And so they don't, like, the performance idea where there is imperfection can be a great part of it. You know, whatever is happening in the room is the show, you know? And so obviously nobody wants to fuck up, but if you do, it's still the show. And that idea seems to have disappeared to a certain extent in all of popular music. That there is a certain kind of, everything really does feel automated. And I mean, soulless, I guess is the right word. Yeah, I mean, it's troubling.
Well, I watch a lot of theater people sing, and I can tell they're thinking about it. And it just takes me out. Like, when I see someone singing and they're like singing the perfect notes, you know, and doing the perfect riff, and I could see it in their head. Like, it's not about that. It needs to be about the storytelling and why. You know, what's the why? And it's not something that is accentuated in this. I haven't seen it being accentuated a lot in this industry. I also haven't seen a lot of people pushing people to find their own sound that comes from them that doesn't sound like someone else that they heard on a recording. Yeah. There's, you know, the voices are copies of copies at this point, and it feels a bit misguided. And everyone's going to the same colleges, and it's the same sounds.
Right.
You hear the same thing, and it's just like, where's the gritty? You know, that's what was so great about Miles. He played Michael Jackson in MJ. The thing that was so amazing about Miles and why he won a Tony Award was because you watched him on the stage and he would sing something and you were like, how is he ever going to do that again? His performance felt dangerous. It felt uncontrolled. It felt like he would never do it again.
Right.
It felt like I was getting the final performance of his life.
Yeah.
And that is, there's training, and then there's the ability to let go and find your way and be authentic in yourself. It's not about authenticity of music. It's about authenticity of self.
Yeah.
You know, rock and roll is the genre of rock and roll is massive, and it's so many different sounds. Tom York doesn't sound like, you know, Kurt Cobain.
Right. But Matt Bellamy does sound like Tom York. Sometimes.
Yes,
not all the time.
Yeah,
but
he does, yeah. But like, you know, and Axl Rose doesn't sound like Chris Cornell.
Right.
But they sound similar, but not, it's different. But like, what makes these performers, what makes rock and roll singers is this authenticity of themselves and their own voice and their own sound coming out. It has absolutely nothing to do with the notes they're singing. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with grit.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the idea of this, like, the danger in a performance, not like, oh my God, he might fall off the stage, but the idea that, like, I can't believe this performance is actually occurring, because it really does look like they're going to explode or fall apart or, you know, fly all over the place. But, like, that's the thing that rock and roll was, like, really founded on. And it is, like, the most thrilling elements of that form is what, you know, like, it doesn't necessarily matter if you cotton to Iggy Pop's records, although, you know, there's many good reasons to. It's the idea that when he's on stage, he really looks like he's going to injure himself or whatever. You can't believe that he does that twice, much less every night, you know?
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is. And there's a lot to be said for the appearance of that as opposed to actually, like, cutting yourself with a broken bottle. That's maybe less artful and more, you know, you're contributing to somebody's bad habits or something. But still, it's exciting and it's in fact thrilling. But
yeah, but it also comes from a place of a real place. It's not. Yeah. It's not put upon. It's not false, or it's not a copy, I guess.
Right.
Like,
and it's funny because you would say,
emotional
I think
depth.
a lot of people would say it's not performed, but it absolutely is performed.
It is performed, yeah, 100%.
It's just, it's not performance in that sort of, performance has come to mean fake to a lot of people, but it's exactly not that if it's done properly.
Yeah, totally, 100%. Like, I love watching old video of like David Bowie or like Peter Gabriel. What they do on stage is so, there's something that's gravitational. You're so drawn to them. You believe everything that's coming out of their mouth. You believe everything that's coming out of their soul.
Yeah.
And that is a performance. But
Absolutely.
that's what I want in theater. Like, I want that.
Right.
I want to believe these kids. Like, I do. You know, I always stress to anyone who asks me for any advice, I'm like, just find yourself. If you got to find yourself. That was, part of my journey.
It's less like just hitting the mark and doing your number every night.
Yeah.
I'm really stuck on the thing you said when you mentioned vowel sounds. I just have those like weird, are they diphthongs? Like I don't, they have the weirdest vowel ideas now. And it's even become the source of like parody on, I don't know, Instagram Reels. There are people who make, like, boy, what? Why? How did that happen? I remember when I first noticed it was about 10 years ago. And it really was like, why are you singing like that? What is wrong with you?
It's a copy of someone, and I can't put my finger on who it is. I feel like it was someone in Rent that did it.
Oh my God.
And it's a copy from that. Because, like, literally Rent, the people in Rent, they
have a lot to answer for.
They started an entire revolution of singers. Like, really, to their credit, they did. And that revolution should have revolutioned again into something else new. But now it's just copy.
Right.
I feel like that genre in that time period right there with like that that was the new thing, and then it became just the thing.
Rent came out exactly when I dropped out of theater school and started singing in a band. I mean, right in the year or two between those things. And I really remember being like, I know that if I had heard this 2 years ago or a year ago, I would have been right on board. Mm-hmm. And by now, by that time, I had heard so much other music that I hadn't really either been exposed to or understood at that time that I hated it. I hated it with everything that I am. And I haven't really ever heard much of it since. I haven't listened to it since then, but good God, y'all, I hated it. I mean, but musically, like the idea of transferring La Boheme to that environment sounded great to me. It sounded like such a cool idea.
It's such a pop culture moment in time. It's a massive pop culture moment in time. All those voices, that specific sound of that show.
Yes.
It sounds, and now you listen to it and it's very dated, but that's because it was so popular. Same thing of Hamilton for me.
Right.
It's like because when Hamilton came out, it was revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
No one had heard anything like this before, and it was unbelievable. And then I hear it again, and I'm like, oh, that is so that moment in time. That is, it's so specific.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And not that dated. I'm not saying dated is a bad thing, but it is. It just recalls.
Time stamped.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I mean, in another way, that is a thing about musical theater that is kind of a powerful legacy of when it was a culturally dominant thing. You could say the same thing about Oklahoma, like it was a very revolutionary, radical piece of work. I don't know that it had the effect that it was sort of credited with having, but the intention of it, and certainly the tunes are memorable. But goddamn, I would never listen to that cast album. I would sooner eat my own foot. But I'm curious so your band is no longer a band.
No, we've been trying to get back together, but it's been tough because everybody lives everywhere else. Which
Bands
sucks.
are really hard to keep together.
They are, especially older age. Like everyone's got kids, and the main guy. So it was me and this guy who ended up being my boyfriend. never date your guitarist in your band. But it was, we were kind of the people driving the band. And he was writing all the music. His brother would write some music as well, but he was basically the one writing all the music. He would do all the graphics and stuff like that. And I was the one putting on the shows and getting all the people there and doing all that. And then I was also his kind of muse because I was the singer that, he was writing all the songs for. And then, we broke up. And a few years had passed and we became friends again. And I was like, we wrote so many songs together that were never going to be a part of The Deafening, which was our band. I was like, we should do something with those songs. Like, why don't I do an album of the songs and we finish them and do that? And so I did, and I finished the album. I haven't released it yet. I'm really waiting for the right time to release it. It's called Lullabies for the End of the World. And it's a very dark and sad, it's a very dark and sad album that has, I call it modern grunge because it's like so 90s. But like, of course. But while we were writing that show, he found out he had stage 4 liver cancer.
Oh my God!
Or that music, doing that album, and it was like the first thing he wanted to do was get the band back together because it was like wanting to live and that heyday of when we were playing music and being creative together.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to facilitate that, but it's been really hard. But he's lucky. I've never heard of this before, but he's cancer free.
Really?
From stage 4 liver cancer, yeah.
Because there's no stage 5, right?
No stage 5. Yeah. Stage 4 is it. And he went through hell. And it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's insane. And now I'm like, well, what can we do? Like, we've got to do, because you've got a second chance. So what do you want to do with your second chance?
Right.
How can we do this together?
Wow. I'm sorry that he had to go through that. And I'm sorry that it's so hard to have a band. It's the hardest thing.
So hard to have a band.
Every day you get older, it's harder.
Why?
I think it's because it's hard to have a group of people who are all willing to believe in the same thing and take, like, for band. I mean, some bands are one person is the band and everybody else just sort of takes their orders or whatever. They're sort of in the service of this person's vision. And that's a way to be. And it's legit. But the person who's in charge has to make sure everybody gets taken care of.
Exactly, yeah. You have to pay.
But then at least, pay is good, but at least taken care of, at least treated with dignity and not abused,
yes,
in any important way. So that's one way. But I think to me, the ideal thing, and the thing I had when I had a band, was that there was this one thing, it belonged equally to all 4 of us, and we all loved it, and we all we were all enfranchised within it. But all bands, I think, are kind of defined by the push and pull between the collective identity and the individual identities.
Yeah.
And so as you get older, you're much more attuned to your individual identity or your identity. You're married, so your identity within your couple and your identity as a person making your own work and also doing, your career work as well. Like, it's much harder to then be like, to give yourself to something else too.
Yeah, we've really been trying. But a lot of the other members are, well, our drummer, he lives in Austin now. He's got 2 kids.
Right.
And then our bass player, his brother, or the other guitar player, he lives in Maine, and he has got 3 beautiful children. And then the rest of us don't have children.
Right.
Like, what are we going to do?
Maybe it's the kind of thing where you do a show.
Right, yeah. Like
and that, because that's sort of, you could get everybody together for a few days to rehearse or whatever, But
if you want to do new music and
brutal.
You need to be in a group together and you need to have a couple, have hours where you can just groove on something and be like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if and you can't really do that with just a few days.
That's
you have to
right.
get into a groove.
No,
it's tough.
for sure. And you have to be able to try stuff that doesn't work and then be a little discouraged but still come back. Yeah, it's brutal, man.
Yep.
So, you've put out all these recordings that you did. I think you did them during the pandemic, the Obsessed series.
The Obsessed series, yeah. No, that was they came out in 2018. So
Oh, okay. So
that
that's
whole
right.
So the whole year was actually dedicated to that entire series of 12 albums. It was very cool.
And you have, I mean, there are other recordings as well. I mean, the record you have in the vaults that you're considering putting out, I mean, are you, okay, so the question of putting out records now is its own very vexed, difficult thing, because I find that if you put out a record and you're not able to or willing to spend $30,000, $40,000 to get it noticed in some way, it's the difference between putting out a record without doing that and not putting out a record at all is very small. Yeah. It's almost the same thing as just not doing it.
Yeah, except you'll have $30,000 at the end.
Right, exactly. That's one big difference. I wish that were a way to earn $30,000.
It used to be.
But, you know, then you have this record and presumably you love it and you think that in a world where there are still audiences for things, there is an audience for it. And that's worth, you know, paying attention to, that hunger, you know, especially as times get more and more horrible.
I think that I finished it last year around this time, and I was like, Snowpiercer season 4, I was waiting for that to air, and then they announced they were never going to air it, and I was like, well, because, you know, again, I was like, I worked really hard on this album, and it's the first time that I'm putting out original music and not covers, and so I was like, I really don't want this to just like go under the radar, because if I just release it, no one's gonna see it. Like, I mean, a few people will, but it's just like there needs to be something else to support it.
Yeah.
So I've just been sitting on it and holding on to it, and I've had some ideas because it is a grandiose conceptual album. That's basically. It basically is like a tracking of, it's called Lullabies for the End of the World, but it's really just like about how we go into a relationship and change who we are for someone and kind of kill the person we were before, but then that destroys the relationships and the relationship dies because we don't know who we are anymore because we've changed for that person. Some people do. I used to do that a lot. And it's a reflection of the relationship I had with my co-writer and guitarist and ex-boyfriend. And I even like included some arguments that I have on tape because when we were recording these things when we were together, we would record them at like 4 a.m. We were high and drunk and recording these songs, and we would get into these bickering arguments, and they were very funny. And it was just kind of how we interacted with each other. And you can just. I love the sense of relationship you get from those snippets. So I was like, can I include them? And he was like, ugh, fine. Yeah. But, you know, but the songs really do reflect kind of like this kind of destruction of self and then the destruction of the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a totally personal question, and so please tell me if you don't want to answer it. But does your husband have any objection to you working on music and like working on things that, not to say that you're still necessarily in the old relationship, but that have to do with the old relationship? Is it painful? Is it frustrating?
No, my husband's been amazing. Like he's handled all of it with beautiful, wonderful flying colors. When I found out that he had stage 4 liver cancer, like he was like, let me know what you need. You can take the car anytime. You can go visit him in East Hampton. Whatever you need to be there to support him, I'll support you. Like, he's been nothing but incredible about that relationship. He makes jokes all the time, you know, is the way that he deals with it. But I think it's because, I mean, he knows that I'm not going there again.
Right.
Like, I'm not going back to that. And my husband's amazing, too, because I have to do love scenes and, you know, be in awkward sexual situations on camera quite a bit. And, you know, he's very, very, very good at handling that.
Yeah.
It's like I've never felt like he was judging me, and I never felt like he was like, like upset with me because he's thinking like, oh, I'm falling in love with someone else. Like
Right.
he came in, kissing guys on stage, he's just like, whatever. Like he understands that the storytelling, it's the storytelling. And at the end of the day, it's not like I'm lusting or going after that person. It's like I'm always coming home to him because this is my real life. And I've learned that, but it was something that was learned because when you're younger, you do the thing of where you do the showmance and it's a big, big problem, or you date your guitarist that you should be dating. Like me and my guitarist, we should have always just been best friends. And that was, and that's always clear to me. We are very, very, very good friends. And that, the relationship was misguided, probably.
Yeah. So many are.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the thoroughness of that answer. I'm curious because that's something that it doesn't even need to tread. I mean, obviously, like the romantic scene element of it hadn't even occurred to me, but of course, that's another thing. But I just find that because a lot of my songs have always been, they're all about relationship things for them. It's basically girlfriend, family, culture. That's all.
Yeah.
Right? Those are my subjects. And, I also have a tendency to make a thing and then sit on it for years because I lose confidence or I don't, a certain, like the idea of pursuing it starts to feel disgusting to me and different reasons. But then, when you're dealing with stuff, even from relationships like fizzled 10 years ago or something, people in the present tense can be a little bit like, why are you still singing about that? And it's like, I'm not.
Yeah.
It's hard for people, I think.
Yeah, it is. I feel like my husband is a super anomaly. Like the fact that he has such chill about all of this and can make jokes too, like he wanted to meet Sean Bean and be like, hi, it's nice, pleasure working with you.
Right.
like
he is sort of slightly related now.
Yeah. So it's just, it's he's been nothing but amazing about it. I'm so lucky because I think that he's not in the industry at all.
Right. That was the next question.
And so he's a real estate agent, what would he know about doing a romantic scene or the awkwardness or he could think that it's real for sure. But
I mean, that's tricky to reconcile for anyone, even people who are, in the business and have been for a long time.
Yeah.
Because, of course, it looks real. That's the whole point.
The whole point.
And it's not like, I mean, I know that sometimes people who are cast in roles where they have to kiss or pretend to have sex that they can't stand each other. And they're able to either sublimate it somehow or just plow right through, so to speak.
Yeah.
But still it is, the idea that they're the same person when they're doing the performance as they are when they go home is sort of I think that's the myth, in a way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because the point of doing a love scene or make out or whatever, it has to make sense for the show and for the character, and it has to push storyline forward. If it's very important in the storyline, then you need it to be viscerally feeling like it's real.
Right.
You need the audience to be like, when it happens, they can't be like, oh, it's a stage. You know what I mean? It's like, to me, that doesn't tell the story. Like the whole point of being on stage or on camera is we are telling story. It has to look real for the audience,
right?
And it's not real for me, but it has to be real for the audience. So I always put a lot of thought and a lot of attention on romantic scenes because I want to make sure that they're necessary, because if they're not necessary, what's the point? Then you don't need it. But if they are very necessary, well, then what does the audience need to get out of this, seeing this, that is pushing story forward? And if that's the case, then I've got to deliver on that, and it can't be like, I don't know. It's like when I see someone I'm like, ugh. Like, it's just like, it can't take the audience out of I want the scene to pull the audience into the relationship more instead of them going, that's a stage, like being like, oh, that's a stage kiss, like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they really don't look like they want to kiss each other, like.
Yeah. Did Snowpiercer put you into the realm of like, do you now have a lucrative sideline as going to nerd conventions?
No.
No? Could you? I mean, is that part of the fandom of that show? Like the sci-fi?
I don't know. I don't know because I've never been invited to a Comic-Con. Like,
right.
I'm like dying to go. I would love to do shows or something, perform.
Because it's more highbrow sci-fi, but it's still sci-fi.
It's it's way cool sci-fi. And like, it was supposed to, so it was supposed to be in 2019. We were going out, we were doing Comic-Cons, we were doing all of the press and stuff. The show hadn't come out yet. It was all the pre kind of thing. So people didn't really understand what it was yet. But it was supposed to be this huge deal. And then the pandemic happened. And the whole time that Snowpiercer aired, the pandemic was happening. Mm-hmm. So there was no Comic-Con. There were no opening nights. There was no in-person press to do. And because of that, it just killed any sense of going out and doing any of that. I did more with my one episode of My Little Pony for BronyCon and like PonyCon than I did with this huge juggernaut of a sci-fi show like Snowpiercer. And I'm always like, what happened? Like, God,
did they? So you made season 4, but they're never going to show it.
Made season 4. The rumor is, and I could be wrong, but this is what I've heard, is that the original production company, they were able to take all of the seasons and get them out of the grips of TNT. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to sell a prequel show and with season 4 attached and all the rest of the seasons. So it's like if you get to air season 4 if you do the prequel. That's my understanding, but I could totally be wrong.
Well, I'm no expert, but it might surprise you to learn I used to be kind of a nerd when I was a kid. But it does seem like the best route you can possibly have to like a fandom among sci-fi nerds or like a certain kind of nerd community is to have an unaired something that they can clamor for and demand somehow that they have some sort of fan response to. So I wouldn't be surprised if you could definitely at least maybe fund the release of your record by doing a couple of those shows.
Exactly. Yeah. And,
it's maybe not the most glamorous version, but apparently it's great.
Yeah. I was also thinking about doing like an immersive show with my album or something, making it like a theatrical experience instead of like an album concert.
Now, is this the one-woman show that you're talking about, or is that different?
No, that's different. Okay. Yeah. I have a lot going on.
Well, what is the story with your one-woman show?
Well, this will be my 4th. And this time, I usually like tell stories that are kind of related. Like I have like a boundaries of the stories to talk through. So like the first one I did, it was about growing up my childhood in the house with my parents in school and things like that. And then the second one I did was just like all about ex-boyfriends and basically like what they ruined for me or like the songs and every time it's always a song, like the songs, I'm super fascinated by how music sparks really strong memories. And there are some songs that will just take me right back into a place and I'm like, feel like I'm living there again. And I definitely think that's why we listen to old music so we can feel youthful.
No doubt.
But
no, I don't mean the band No Doubt. Undoubtedly you are correct.
But like, all my shows come from the songs that will spark these memories. And so like I did the one with all the ex-boyfriends is all the music that related to each of those ex-boyfriends. And then I did one all about my worst and best audition stories. And it was all the music that was that. And now this time I was like, I think I'm going to tell the stories about like how many times I was nearly murdered in Broadway shows. So it's basically like the caveat, not the caveat, that phrase, the show must go on.
Yeah.
It's like something that is deep in my soul. And it was just like beat into me when I was a kid, As a ballerina, my first big medal of honor that I got was a bloody point shoe. And that I kept dancing in my point shoe until my feet bled.
Oh, yeah.
And that, and it's like pushing through that pain. It was always seen as like, good job, right? And so that has affected my career in many, many different ways. When I was in Cats, it's a very long story. I ripped my actual fingernails off and kept going on stage. That's
horrible.
I got a concussion on stage during Hedwig. I impaled my finger on stage in Hedwig. Like, I got my heart broken right before I had to go out on stage and spile. Like, it's like,
wow,
all these ways where I had to push through the urge, the desire to stop.
Right.
And keep going. And it's also like when my ego was crushed, pushing through the dead ego, like pushing through that heartache of your ego getting killed and keeping going, keeping going through all the no's. Keeping going through all the rejection that you get in our industry. It's all of these sometimes literal physical stories of me getting hurt and keeping going, or emotional stories of being in pain but keeping going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it called The Show Must Go On?
It's called The Show Goes On. Because I think the show must go on
There have to be 50 shows
it's
called that.
Yeah, it's tough. So it's just the show goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you do these shows, where do you do them? What is the ideal sort of setting for those shows, the ideal venue?
Usually I would do them because the Carlisle would be like, here, we want you to do a 2-week engagement. And I'd be like, all right, well, what can I do? So I would develop it for the space, right? So did them at the Carlisle, did them at 54 Below, I've done them, at these cabaret clubs, right? Small cabaret clubs. I think the aim, at least for this one, because the other ones I was just telling stories off the cuff and then having songs, and I kind of knew the general idea, and it wasn't written out, planned out, any of that. This time around, I actually have a writer-director, I have a production company on board. We're making it a show. Which I'd like to do with the other 3, but we're doing this one first. And it was all because I have this show that I have to do in London at Cadogan Hall. And I booked that gig, and I was like, well, what am I going to do at Cadogan Hall? Am I going to do just a concert, or am I going to tell story? And I'm always wanting to tell story. I think it's just in my soul to to tell stories, just standing there and being like, and this next song is, it's not how I function, because even in my band, it was theatrical, because I would end up being like in one song, I would put on the teeth that I still had left over from Dracula, and I would go out in the audience and I would bite someone, and I'd have blood in my mouth, and I'd spit it all over them, and it would come all over, all over my face, and I'd come on stage and I'd be like,
Yeah.
It was all of these silly but theatrical, but great, because the music was so awesome, tongue-in-cheek, hard rock. It was classic rock, tongue-in-cheek, silly but great music.
What was that, 1976 Is that the song?
Yeah, Evil Kiss.
Yeah.
Yeah, about an evil car.
Yeah.
And then there was The Destroyer, which is about an evil destroyer ship. And then there was...
A lot of evil.
Death, Rattle, and Roll, which was, it was all something that was dark, dark.
I think that sounds great. I love that kind of show.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do that myself.
The guys hated me for it.
Right.
They were like, we're serious. But I'm like, come on, this is fun. I made a cutout of a car that had lights on it for Evil Kiss, and I put my hairdryer on the inside of it. So when I hit a high note, and you saw me I was singing the song in the car, and when I hit the high note, I turned on my hairdryer, so my hair was blowing.
Right.
To me, it was I wanted to, and really entertain the audience, you know?
Yeah.
And bring that theatricality into the rock space. And yeah, I thought it was great.
Any lead singer will be able to tell you a story about the time they were telling a story before a song, and the bass player or the drummer would start just being like, boom, 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 boom. Okay, ready to play another one.
Yeah. I didn't talk a lot. I spoke more in theatrics during the
Sometimes
numbers.
Dracula fangs speak louder than words.
I mean,
I've always
truly.
found.
If you can see a video online, it's very funny.
I can't thank you enough for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was awesome. Did we hit all your points?
I think we did. I think we hit all of them and more.
Nice.
I didn't ask you what it was like to work with Christine Lottie, but that's only just 'cause she's my favorite.
Is she?
One of my very favorite actors, yeah.
Oh, really? She's awesome. She's awesome.
I would have to believe she would be fantastic.
Friggin' brilliant and so wonderful.